Hi everyone, my name is Phoebe Kingston. I'm a lived experience peer worker working in several different peer worker roles in Western Australia. And that's as large an introduction as I wanted to do, because in the essence of time, I think there's much more interesting things to talk about than my background. So it's all there with the abstract. I'm going to begin my presentation in the true spirit of a peer support worker, which was one of my former roles, and intentionally storytell. And it's through this storytelling, and it's a true story, I'm really going to attempt to set some context for this presentation, because this is really about the issues and concerns for the peer support workforce historically, currently, and moving forward into the future. WA Department of Health has within it three main area metropolitan health services, and in 2014 one of those health services had a grand plan to establish the first WA peer support workforce for its community-based clinics. So we have had peer support in WA for some time in hospital inpatient settings, but no peer workers in our government mental health community clinics, and there was a real need to have it there, obviously. So this was a great plan, and although really it's just in line with our national commitment to grow lived experience workforce, for this health service, it was really very innovative, progressive and ambitious, because this had not been done or attempted before. So very exciting times and very, very challenging and daunting times. In the first quarter of 2015, 8 individuals were selected to be those first peer support workers. So effectively, they were going to establish a peer support service in the localities for that health service. No small task, because they were going to be the first and only peer workers in those clinics, and working with people, staff, clinicians, the service users who may never have heard of peer support before. So the challenges involve great blind leaps of faith, the need for support, education, leadership, management, flexibility, and a great deal of tenacity, vigilance, perseverance, and resilience. And in fact, those were the qualities that those individuals were primarily selected for. In the initial phases, what I sort of call the fledgling birthing phases of this peer support service, there was a great deal of support, and the health service had done a great job of finding suitably qualified individuals to provide that management and leadership and structure. And that is quite hard in WA, because this had never been done. There were lots of meetings, one-to-one group meetings, the same for supervision, very regular administrative support, personal supports, flexibility, and everything tracked along very well for those individuals for quite some time. The story does take a turn, and essentially what can happen is that things change over time due to the nature of all sorts of different areas for which no one person is to blame. Things became very, very complicated and very strained relatively quickly after one certain thing had happened. And so what often happens in government is that rules change, structures change, people are seconded into other roles, and what ultimately resulted was that the fantastic guidance and leadership and supervision and support that is so badly needed, and for very specific reasons for peer support workers, dissipated away. And some of the reasons for that were just technical reasons of people being in leave and being in other roles. But what happens after time is that when a role is not backfilled, things become lost, and information becomes lost, the ethos becomes lost, the structures become lost, and eventually then policies aren't reviewed in line with where they needed to be, with that history that has brought them to the current time, and you end up with a very, very shaky foundation and no real architecture and leadership for that workforce moving forward. I wouldn't even say it was wholly the health services fault, because the health service is doing something that's not been done before. I think what has happened historically, and not just talking about this specific health service, there are always the same issues and the same complexities that are brought to light that are very easy to see in retrospect, and great lessons have been learned through errors. And again, this is not about any individual's errors, it is just that service context. The kinds of problems that occurred have actually been seen elsewhere around the globe. There is a lot of international literature about what happens in peer support services in that establishment phase. The first 5 years is really, really crucial. To establish and embed would take a number of years. I would argue that all that literature is available for services, but it's more a case of their awareness that they would need to be looking at this literature and that it exists. And so that is just the situation that occurs. When a leader is seconded to another position and not backfilled because there has been such a great confidence in a particular workforce, then that is lovely that there has been a confidence in that workforce, that they're embedded, they're in, they know what they're doing, and they can probably run their own meetings, get some training in, and we'll have a few executive, a little bit of oversight here or there, and the feeling that that is sufficient is understandable from the context of executive levels that do not have the nuanced understanding of what this workforce is and how it is supposed to function and be led and supervised. And so what happened in this story is that for a period of a number of years, there was no supervision for these workers. There was not the types of support that were really needed, certainly not the leadership and management. What happens in that? Lots of things become lost, and they become a Chinese whispers or just a distant memory, or they just fade away into an abyss where a service and individuals and the work and other areas of the workforce don't remember how something was established and what its role is. And then when you get to the point where upper executive levels of a health service don't actually understand there is a problem, then obviously that's harder to fix. It is sometimes the upper levels that actually need the most education in what that service is and what it requires, because some of the clinicians on the ground who work with peer support workers developed a very good understanding of what peer workers do. There is massive respect and collaboration and wonderful clinician to peer worker relationships happening. There are some good ideas in middle management, but again, with sort of restructuring and secondments and portfolios changing, these things become so easily lost, and it gets to the point where there hasn't been much attention there for so long that, like I said, the upper echelons of an organisation then actually don't realise that there is a problem. Now, you can provide advocacy, fierce advocacy for a certain amount of time, but that is very difficult when there are major other issues going on in a service that absolutely have to be fixed. And so we've found ourselves in WA in the situation where out of a workforce of 8 that stuck with this for quite some time, there is now only one of those original peer support workers who established this service left in that workforce. And it begs the question that as new people are coming in, where is their supervision and guidance? And when there is no architecture for those people coming in, they come in with no history of how that service established. They may also be newly qualified, or in some ways it's worse, they may have a great deal of experience in an NGO sector and be swapping to government, and that would be even harder. There is only a certain amount of time that you can deprioritise something that has become a dire circumstance. There's only a certain amount of time you can do that before those consequences really come to the foreground. And another frustrating issue for some peer support workers is that they may have very specific expertise, not just in the peer support workforce role, but other areas of expertise within that service and external to that service, and in other roles and positions and in influences and educated backgrounds. And when you have individuals who have very specific expertise who are able to help solve the problem, and they are not utilised, there is another a problem that is avoidable. In this specific health service, there were individuals who had taken a particular tertiary course of study, of which is the only one in the world. There are other individuals who were in this health service that had skills in teaching, training and drafting policy review. One of the peer support workers in the service also happened to be the deputy of the Chief Mental Health Advisory Council to the Executive Director of the Health Service, was an executive level advisor both there and externally elsewhere through other roles and businesses and initiatives. And that person was able to advocate both from a frontline experience of what was going on in the health service, but through that more macro advocacy level to executive. There were connections within that peer workforce to very, very educated individuals on the subject in WA. We have 6 people in WA who have highly nuanced and academic, lived, and blends of those two, and plus teaching and training backgrounds that could provide all the advice, all of the support to the health service to understand this workforce. Those individuals are themselves networked, and so when a health service has every expertise, experience, both lived, academic, contextual, and educational experiences and knowledges within the peer support roles, when you have connections directly and it is pointed out to the health service that those connections are available, and the peer workers within that peer workforce are able to bring all of this together and help, and that 2 years later and 3 years later there has been no action on that, then you can probably understand the levels of frustration and burnout that can occur in a peer support service in this context. Our Western Australian peer workers in the NGO sector have some wonderful architecture in embedding support, education, training, supervision and leadership and all the things that they need. There is some wonderful stuff happening from our peak body here, our peak consumer advocacy body, and a few other little pockets. There are fantastic supports available, not just supports, but new initiatives, new groups, new ideas, and networking. And I would propose that actually WA is perhaps doing that better than some of our eastern counterparts. We have an interesting project happening at the moment about trying to get people ready and prepared to take on peer support work roles. This isn't about their training. This is specifically about how do you get into this work? What is it like? What do I need beside my nationally accredited qualification? The one issue there, one more issue, is that we understand peer work in the NGO sector very, very well. And we're doing a lot in that space. The issue that I don't think is very well understood across the board here is that the peer support role in the NGO sector at some levels is unrecognisable to the role of a peer support worker in a government mental health service, particularly obviously for inpatient, those statutory services, involuntary services. The issues and the challenges for government peer support workers are very specific to that role, and they are not occurring in the same dimension that they do in NGO. And so when we have wonderful projects about getting people ready for work in peer support, which is great, the issue is that there is no expertise there at the moment that will prepare anyone to go into a government and peer support worker role. Rather than come here and put a big problem on the table, is perhaps talk about what the solution might be and the wonderful things that are going on and the potential for what can be done. The health service here is a fantastic health service with incredible executive staff, new direction and culture, and there is everything there for an absolutely world-class mental health service, because the commitment is from the heart and it is real, and all these things are being fixed, they're in process, the dedication is real, it will all come true. What we need is for the wonderful things happening in our and structure and supports happening for our NGO peer support workers, is for that to be channeled and connected to our public mental health service peer workforces. We need that avenue of communication, that network, the exchange of knowledge and support, and because the only way to make a sustainable peer workforce, no matter what context it's in, I'm talking about a state peer support workforce recognised as WA's peer support workforce, is to have those connections and have that cross-pollination and have those experiences, knowledges, the supervision, the structure and leadership very, very well connected. And this is what's not happening. We have government health services who don't understand their own peer support workforce, let alone know how it's being done really well elsewhere, and no avenues of communication between the two. And in fact, the NGO sector can learn a lot from what is going on and has historically gone on in the public peer support workforce. And so it's only when you really connect all of that knowledge together that I think we're going to start solving the problem. There is some work here being done nationally to provide a set of national guidelines for peer support work. That is part of the national issue of lack of architecture and bodies to supervise and lead the peer support workforce. I do have an issue there, is that when there are some individuals here in WA with who have established a peer support workforce for the first time, who have also unique qualifications, experiences, education. When those individuals are not consulted with on a national body that's developing guidelines and are told that their experience isn't really relevant, and then when one individual then does go and offer that they have unique information and experiences that only one person in the state has, and again there's inaction, it does there are some of us very concerned about what the national guidelines will look like, because there doesn't appear to be diversity in that advisory body. And so we may just see a set of guidelines that looks great for a window of an NGO peer support worker and really is no help, or even in some ways more of a hindrance to those who are working in, say, statutory services as peer workers. And so I would hazard a guess that within a few years, considering there are other metropolitan health services here that have approached the one that has tried this, asking for help, they want to do their own, and that conversation has been, don't ask us yet because we just need to tidy up this backyard, but yes, we will help. And those communications happen within the public sector, and then there's a set of guidelines that does not in any way reflect any of that history and those unique knowledges going on here in that context. That could be a problem, and I would hazard that these national guidelines may very well need reviewing within a very short space of time. And so that's pretty much all I have time for. So I really hope that we strive forward in WA, because we do some stuff very, very well, and I'm very ambitious for our peer workers here. Thank you for listening.